Great to have you, Rollin Reisinger, joining us. Rollin is legislative aide for Senator Jill Vogel, Republican from the Valley, and he was at the convention on Saturday in Harrisonburg and sending out some pretty informative tweets there, covering it. Rollin, great to have you with us.
Good morning, John. It's great to be on, and what a wild convention it was, wasn't it? Yes,
you're also with Andrew Vehorn. You know Andrew, right?
I do. Good morning, Andrew.
Everybody knows Andrew. Andrew's an iconic figure in this town, and certainly in Virginia. So, Ron, it was crazy. So give us your bird's eye view. What the hell happened?
So, John, this convention really had everything. You had done a great job covering the run-up to it where, as Andrew mentioned, the process controversies itself became the story. There was a lot of anticipation going in. A lot of people didn't know which way this thing might go, and it all came down to that critical temp chair vote that we had at the beginning of the convention, in which Jack Wilson ended up capturing 62% of the vote there from delegates that had become concerned by the process. We had seen all of these challenges to delegates filed by, the campaigns of Cynthia Dunbar and Scott Sayer going in. As soon as we had that new temp chair elected, those credentials challenges stopped, and everybody thought we'd get to a ballot fairly soon, but that's not what happened. It took a while to get the convention organized. We went until 2:30 before that first ballot started, and it wouldn't be until around 4:30 when we had preliminary results. John, a lot of people had started to clear out of there, and we were wondering what might happen on a second ballot, but then ultimately got to that 52%, and we didn't have to go that far.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because a lot of people, right, so they were getting there, they were checking at 10. Balloting wasn't until, 3? When was the first ballot?
Balloting started about 2:30.
2:30, so
check-in actually began at 8.
8, okay, so some people got there at 8. It closed at 10, right, so if they're there average at 9, right, so they're already there 5.5 hours before they even vote. This is a long time. It's a Saturday, man. People got stuff going on. So then they want to vote, they want to leave. And I got some reports telling me that the Klein people were freaking out because their people were voting, thinking, oh, this is in the bag, and they were leaving. And the irony of this had Chaz Haywood, who was a third candidate, clerk of court from Harrisonburg, had he gone forward and not pulled out and endorsed Ben Klein, he would have probably gotten, we were figuring 8%, 9%. So that brings the Klein down to 45 or 44, Dunbar at 40, Klein's people leaving. Dunbar peoples were not leaving. So that could have made it a little hairy.
Well, you're absolutely right, John, and there were two dynamics in play here. I'm glad you brought up Chaz because in addition to Ben Markey and Zach Werrell, Chaz is one of the superstars of this convention for doing what he did. So for your listeners who may not be aware, when Chaz Haywood took to the podium to speak, he gave a very heartfelt speech, but in the middle you could kind of see him pause for a little bit, and that's when from the stage he chose to suspend his candidacy and throw all of his support behind Klein. That did two key things for the convention. First, it helped get some of his voters behind Klein, but it also reduced the number of ballots, potential ballots anyway, from 4 to 3. So by having all those Haywood voters for Klein on the first ballot, casting that ballot before they left, those votes went in the bank for Ben on the first ballot rather than a subsequent ballot. There was a lot of concern in the convention hall, John, that this thing had taken too long. You just looked at the seats, you saw empty holes there. You walked the parking lot, and when you saw cars beginning to clear out, when you saw even some legislators beginning to leave, that's when people supporting Klein knew they had to unify on that first ballot.
That makes a lot of sense. So people were voting, what you're saying, even before the result, they were voting Andrew and leaving. Voting and leaving for Klein.
Yes, I think you had a lot of
I think that's what Rollin's saying. Like, they were there 6 hours, they voted. They voted for the temp chair, they voted for Brown, they voted for Klein, they left.
I think the Klein campaign did the Dunbar campaign did a very good job of stealing the resolve of the Klein supporters with the email controversy telling people they weren't allowed to show up. There were texts that were going out allegedly from the Dunbar campaign on the day of the convention telling people, go ahead and leave after you've casted your ballot, you're not needed anymore. That kind of stuff, people, shenanigans, whatever you want to call it. I think that made people want to stick around. But I'll give you a personal experience. My in-laws went. We had our daughter's birthday party. We ended up pushing it back to like 6 o'clock at night so that they could go to the convention. And they were told, everyone knew, the Klein campaign drilled home, the most important vote is the vote for the rules and the temporary chairman. So even if you can't stay all day, come and vote while you can. And so you had a lot of folks who may not have been able to stay all day and might not have come had they not had that outreach telling them, if you can't come all day, come and vote for the rules, come and vote for the chairman, and then stay as long as you can to make sure you're there for the key pieces of the votes.
Let's get back to Rollin here. Rollin Reisinger with us. So, Rollin, the nonsense that Sayer and Dunbar did, the cheating, the rigging, the stealing, I mean, we ran through the litany of things they tried to do on Friday that were just in the rigged category, trying to manipulate this convention. Would the Dunbar forces have been better off, Rollin, had they just played this whole thing straight?
So I think, yes, in retrospect, John, she was very well tuned in her message with what many of those delegates were wanting to hear. She and Klein both running in that conservative lane that tends to dominate conventions. And looking back at the race, I can't help but notice that, if Dunbar's camp had had one complaint with any of the votes Ben had taken over the years, surely they would have raised that, but that's not what happened. So they felt the need to try and engage in some of these shenanigans. They called Ben Klein the establishment. It's preposterous, but at the end of the day, John, it backfired because Dunbar lost control of the narrative. The Klein campaign had this slogan that well done is better than well said. And with Zach Werrell out there, slowly building up delegate support, the story became about Dunbar. Became about her relationship with Sayer, and delegates were just put off by it.
I agree with you. I think that really backfired for them. And this is the type of thing where, if you're going to come out and spend 5 or 6 hours of your day on a Saturday for a candidate and you're not really that committed to the process, although you like the candidate, and then you keep seeing on social media and other places, my radio show and whatever outlets are out there and the papers that, the system has been rigged and all the examples of them trying to cheat, steal, manipulate, that's just a reason not to come. I mean, even though you might be for Dunbar, I think a lot of people that they signed up were like, I just don't want to get involved in this. And so I think they stayed home. I think that really hurt her. Rollin.
You're right, John, and the turnout numbers showed it. So we had roughly 4,200 delegates who were filed for this convention, about 2,200, 2,100, roughly about half of that ended up showing. Now, some of that's because the Dunbar campaign went outside the pool of traditional convention-going Republicans when filing people outside the gas station, outside the grocery store. In many cases, some of these delegates signed those pre-filing forms not fully knowing what they were getting into. And certainly, the Dunbar campaign did everything it could to try and push those people to come. But as they were watching this race play out in the media, when they saw the controversies, the FEC investigation, one candidate being on payroll, the rules being changed, and many of these anti-transparency moves they made, like excluding the media from the floor. And John, we were both there in 2016 in that same venue, had a great time at your table, saw not one single problem. And, there was plenty of room on the floor there that day. So that led people to question, is this convention really transparent? And then when you saw at the end, all of these delegate challenges filed, that left a very ill taste in the mouths of many delegates, some who had been supporting Dunbar because they believed in growing this party, expanding the tent. You do that through addition, not subtraction. And when you see campaigns filing these baseless challenges, they accused the former executive director of the Republican Party of Virginia, a 3-time Reagan aide who got involved in the Barry Goldwater campaign 50 years ago. They accused him of being a Democrat, and people saw that as being absurd, and the tide turned against them.
Yeah, I think you're right. And as far as us broadcasting, we asked for a 2-foot by 3-foot table. You think there was room for us there? What do you think?
There was plenty of room, Don. We could have been on the floor. It would have not interfered with handicap seating in any way. And in fact, I heard many delegates commenting that there was no live play-by-play. That was a very valuable service, that your show offers to the delegates of conventions when you have hours and hours and hours between ballots. People like to tune in. They like to know what's going on. So when they weren't tuned into what was going on, people had kind of a sense that they didn't know what was going on with this convention.
Right.
And with the air of mistrust, that kind of contributed to some motivation on the part of clients' people.